Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on our Prosthetic Products Showcase webinar. We'll be starting within a couple of minutes. Today's showcase will be on ElanIC. Okay, we'll get started. Thanks again for attending today. There are just a few house rules. If you wouldn't mind, please ensure that your microphones remain on mute until the end of the session, where I'll be happy to take any questions. You can also add any questions on the panel above, and I can ask them at the end of the slide. The meeting will be recorded, and you can receive any handouts or any further information on our website via our surveys and our email addresses below. So today's presentation is on the ElanIC, which is currently the world's lightest microprocessor controlled ankle. I'll be a presenter today, and my name is Kate Pearce, and I'm a prosthetist based in the UK in the Education and Training Department. Today's learning objectives, we will aim to understand better the challenges that amputees suffer with and understand how Blatchford biomimicry aims to improve on some of these challenges. We will have a look at the products and features of the ElanIC, consider the clinical evidence to hand, and also have a quick look at alignment and programming of the ElanIC. So to get started, when we consider the challenges that limb users often encounter, we have some clinical evidence which reports 58% of patients will report to have fallen at least once within a year, up to 70% increase in energy expenditure up for transfemoral amputees, up to 40% for transtibial amputees, 2 to 3 times more likely to develop arthritis, particularly in the contralateral side. 60% of limb users report moderate to severe back pain within the first 2 years of amputation, and 41% have reported residuum tissue damage or skin problems following limb use, and 1/4 of those are reported to be pressure ulcers. So clearly there's several major issues that are reported that need to be addressed within our limb designs. So given that, we'll first look at the design philosophy of Blatchford's hydraulic ankles. So Blatchford design all of their products based on biomimicry, aiming to mimic biology as best as possible. So the human anatomy as best as possible. We wanted to design a foot that would adapt to various terrains and slopes, but it also needed to walk well on level ground. So considering the 4 anatomical rockers of the foot and ankle, we wanted to mimic, number 1, the heel rocker, which is needed to provide shock absorption as well as some form of energy return. Number 2, the ankle rocker, which provides, again, shock absorption at heel strike, but also encourages a smooth rollover through mid-stance, which hopefully reduces the chance of any form of dead spot. A dead spot would increase the user to feel uncertain on their foot and wouldn't give them the confidence that we are trying to aim to achieve. The third rocker, the 4-foot rocker, it needs to provide energy return at toe off, and these rockers all need to work together to create a smooth and natural rollover. What we also need to consider when we're designing these feet was where the ankle position, the pivot of the ankle position would lie, and it made sense to ensure that that ankle pivots at exactly where the anatomical ankle pivot sits as well, to ensure that we're mimicking the biology as best as possible. There's also a 4th rocker, the medial lateral rocker, and Blatchford have recently redesigned the carbon springs on their feet to ensure that the medial lateral rocker is improved significantly. They have done that by increasing the toe springs, the width of the toe springs, to ensure you get better ground compliance. And on top of that, we have a new foot shell that has the sandal toe version. So again, to allow better compliance on the slopes and uneven terrain, ensuring that the foot contours the ground in every circumstance. Next, we need to consider the viscoelastic features of the hydraulic ankle design. The idea is that they mimic biology as best as possible. So when we consider the concentric muscle contractures, we can allow energy to be stored into the springs a lot better, and the eccentric contractures of the muscles by improving on the dampeners of the hydraulic ankle. As an example, if we consider the action of the tibialis anterior, this is an eccentric contracture, which helps to slow down tibial progression down a ramp. So as you can see on the video on the left, where we have a higher resistance on the hydraulic ankle, we ensure that we get further compression on the springs, which then improves energy return. If we then soften the hydraulics on that springs, compliance on the ankle increases, but energy return is then decreased. So there we get a more dampening of the muscles. When we look at these fixed ankles on slopes, we need to consider these in a static position. What we see these common static compensations. On the left-hand side, we can see that the prosthetic limb has a flexed knee. The ground reaction vector goes behind the prosthetic knee, which creates a flexion moment. This requires the amputee to pull back on their residuum, creating excess energy expenditure, and is uncomfortable in standing. On the next image, we can see that the user has locked the knee in full extension for stability, but the foot can no longer conform to the ground. So the ground reaction force vector lies in front of the knee center and the anatomical hip, which creates a flexion moment at the hip. This increases energy expenditure again, because the center of mass is anterior to the natural balance line and increases energy required. When we compare this same situation in a static position with a hydraulic ankle, we can see that everything is nicely balanced. The center of mass is directly above the anatomical hip, the prosthetic knee, and the foot is contoured to the ground because the foot is able to plantarflex, which means there is less effort required to maintain a stable posture. Now we need to look at what this means for the user from a dynamic perspective. When walking downhill on a fixed ankle, the springs store and return energy from heel strike, giving extra propulsion. This can cause an increase in momentum and therefore a loss of control. Meanwhile, the toe springs don't provide resistance until the shank is rotated forwards, which increases a rapid rotation. Uphill, the user is having to fight to overcome the resistance force from the toe springs due to the stiffness and in order to rotate the shank forwards. This means there is a resistance to progression and energy expenditure is required. In contrast, when walking downhill on a hydraulic ankle, due to the plantarflexion nature, the heel spring can store and therefore return less energy at that given time. The foot is stable in a foot flat position and can achieve the shank and can ensure that the shank can rotate over a controlled manner. When we look at the foot going uphill, the shank can rotate further forwards due to the dorsiflexion nature of the hydraulic ankle, which means there is less resistance to progression and the energy in the toe springs are returned in a useful manner. So the difference that this makes is clear. As we can see on the left, the user is clearly uncomfortable, is struggling to control his speed due to the flexion moment at the hips, and he's having to transfer his weight prematurely onto the contralateral side. When we see him walking the same slope with a hydraulic ankle, he's clearly more comfortable. He's not having to hold on to the wall. He's more stable. His step lengths are more natural, and his walking speed is better controlled. In a review of the clinical evidence of the echelons, we see 81% in decrease in internal socket stresses, 87% decrease in socket loading. We get improved symmetry with 14% increase of interlimb loading on the prosthetic side and a 17% decrease on the sound side. Studies also show that there's a reduced likelihood of trips and falls due to the increase in toe clearance during swing phase, given that the foot remains in a dorsiflex position during swing phase, less likely to catch the toes during swing. Further evidence shows a 12% decrease in metabolic cost, i.e. energy expenditure, and a 7% increase in self-selected walking speeds. We also see a 24% reduction in interlimb center of pressure movement when standing on a slope particularly, and 26% decrease in peak plantar pressures on the contralateral side. This suggests that hydraulic ankles will be beneficial for users with ulcerations or diabetic foot problems. To summarize, hydraulic ankles help to sustain a healthy body and improve quality of life. It does this by improving safety, by reducing trips and falls, and reducing the center of pressure during standing, greater control and stability by increasing confidence in walking speeds and varying terrains, greater comfort by reducing socket pressures by up to 60%, a better limb loading, which helps to reduce the chance of long-term limb disease, improved energy expenditure by up to 20.2% on slopes, and increasing patient satisfaction. There was reported 33.4% increase for bilateral patients specifically. This is the range of hydraulic ankles that Blatchford has to offer. We can see on the left, we have the microprocessor units, the Elan and the ElanIC. We have the standard echelon, echelon VAC with an integrated vacuum pump, echelon VT with vertical torsion, and echelon ER, which has the extended range compared with the others. In addition to this, there is also a hydraulic ankle designed for lower activity users, K2 patients, with the Avalon and the Avalon VAC. So let's get into the ElanIC. The ElanIC is a microprocessor ankle that adapts to users' gait and terrain in real time, adapting the resistances on the ankle to ensure that this is carried out. Next, we can discuss the features. Got microprocessor control, standing support. It's simple and compact and is also waterproof. The Elan mimics natural movement from muscle contractures in real time. Looking specifically at the microprocessor control, the Elan is constantly adapting to speeds and terrain by adjusting the resistances. It assists the users up and down slopes, essentially giving them slope assistance and a braking effect down the slopes. It's self-aligning on any terrain in order to reduce those socket pressures, as with the hydraulic ankles, and improves on loading and balance. And it also helps to reduce the risk of trips and falls. The ElanIC standing support detects when you're standing still and ramps up the resistance to support the user. This feature is superb for bilaterals as it negates some of the core stability required to manage the hydraulic ankle movement. It's the most lightweight microprocessor foot on the market and has a new induction charging kit whereas the magnet attaches to the back of the foot and is easy to manage if your user has poor hand dexterity. It has 5.5 hours of full charge. It has a power saving software, whereas when the foot is stationary, it will go into safety and sleep mode, and has up to 48 hours of use depending on the age of the battery and the activity of your user. The further your patient walks, or the faster the patient walks, the quicker the battery will run out. The ElanIC is IP67 rated, meaning it is submergible in fresh water. This allows your user to have more versatility when walking in the real world, and can allow the foot to have to be splash proof as well. Essentially, just rinse it off and off you go again. The ElanIC is excellent on all sorts of different terrains, including level ground. It reduces energy expenditure, so the patient can walk further and faster. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the microprocessor ankles in the 4 phases of gait and how it reacts to normal walking. So at heel strike, the ankle sets the plantar flexion resistance to a medium resistance, which allows the foot to plantar flex smoothly, allowing shock absorption properties and a smooth ground compliance. The independent heel spring is loaded at this time as well. At mid-stance, the heel spring releases its energy to aid in tibial progression, and the medium dorsiflexion resistance is selected, which allows for a controlled forward tibial progression. Once the ankle reaches the end of dorsiflexion range, this causes the toe springs to be loaded with that energy return. At late stance, the toe springs flex, and that allows the release of energy for forward propulsion. Again, during swing phase, the ankle remains in a dorsiflex position, allowing for that toe clearance. The ElanIC features a progressive ramp mode because different situations require different types of control. It senses level ground along with ascending slopes and descending hills and slopes. The Elan adjusts the resistance of the hydraulic in order to alter the function to support the given terrain. Dampening and energy return of the springs are also adjusted because of this. Progressive ramp mode provides the user the best control, stability, and assistance no matter what kind of terrain they encounter. When the Elan detects the user is walking downhill, it adjusts the hydraulics using the microprocessor control by decreasing plantar flexion resistance. This allows for the user to get to a foot flat position faster, which is aiding in stability. It also decreases dorsiflexion to control tibial progression. This acts as a braking mechanism to slow the user down as they descend down the slope. By increasing load and symmetry on the prosthetic side, we encourage prosthetic confidence and avoid muscle and bony atrophy. A decrease on the sound side is good, as it can reduce the dependence on the sound limb and reduce osteoarthritis development. And as a result, more symmetry is seen. The Elan has many proven benefits in addition to hydraulic ankles, which we discussed earlier. The results of the studies above validate that the limb is being slowed down as the user descends down the ramp and makes it safer and a more controlled descent. This occurs on the first step and without the amputee having to think about it. Going up a ramp, the Elan detects the changes in increases the plantar flexion resistance to allow more energy to be stored and returned into the heel, and decreases dorsiflexion to allow quicker rollover, so you load the toe springs a lot sooner. This allows more energy storage of the toes and thus energy return on the toe springs. Changes on the prosthetic limb isn't that substantial when we consider the studies above, but the 7% reduction on the sound limb shows a decreased reliance on the sound limb to support body weight, which protecting against osteoarthritis and development. The same thing happens with the fast walk mode, which actually can be turned on and off depending on your user. Plantar flexion resistance increases and dorsiflexion resistance decreases to allow for further energy return and faster propulsion. Because of this, the Elan is the first and truly cadent responsive foot on the market. It changes how the foot responds based on the speed of the user. Standing support mode is really useful for bilateral patients, as discussed earlier. With standing support mode, plantar flexion resistance and dorsiflexion resistance simultaneously and progressively increase to allow natural standing posture on level and uneven surfaces. This ensures that the user has improved stability. For bilateral patients, they do not have to use the excessive energy which is required as standard in order to stabilize the ankle. By having a natural standing posture, we can reduce socket pressures and provide better stability. When we can see the benefits of standing on slopes with the standing support mode, when we consider the sound side, joint moments with the Elan are reduced when compared with the Echelon by 41% and 59% when compared with energy storage and returned ankles. If we have a look at how much pressure is reduced on the prosthetic side, there's a 43% reduction. Toe clearance is increased due to the dorsiflexion range of 3 degrees. It can increase toe clearance by up to 20%. The ankle pivot helps this during swing phase, as the foot stays in that dorsiflex position. As with the Echelon, we will see an 18% reduction in toe clearance when compared with a fixed ankle. This results in a reduced chance of tripping and falling. Next, we'll discuss the independent study. Please feel free to scan the QR code, which will take you to the paper. This study investigates mobility and physical function when comparing microprocessor ankles to non-microprocessor ankles. The independent study utilizes respective analysis of data. The study was controlled in a non-laboratory-based environment, meaning within clinics. It studies physical functioning and mobility outcomes using varying outcome measures. The primary aim of the purpose of the study was to determine the impact of microprocessor feet on physical function, and secondary aim was to provide preliminary findings of the impact on back pain, residual limb pain, and hill walking. The study consisted of 20 participants, all within the K3 activity level, all of which were transtibial users. The outcome measures used were Promise 29, which is a 29-item survey, which is designed to evaluate patients in 7 different health domains. These include physical functioning, anxiety, depression, fatigue, sleep disturbance, social role and participation, and pain and interference. Mobility subscale was provided using the PEQ, Prosthetic Evaluation Questionnaire. Statistically significant improvements were seen in the increase in physical function, in prosthetic fit, in sitting comfort, with back pain, and hill ascent and descent. Takeaway points here from this study are the clinically meaningful improvements were noted when comparing non-microprocessor ankles to microprocessor ankles. There was an improved quality of life. The statistically significant improvements were seen in 5 of the 7 domains that we discussed in the real-world task assignments. Significant improvements in perception of prosthetic fit and comfort were noted. And the intensity of back pain was reduced with the use of a microprocessor ankle. And it's also important to note that the weight of the ankle wasn't deemed problematic during these studies. So when we consider who the Elan is suitable for, it's important to understand that the Elan is useful for individuals who could benefit from any form of additional stability on slopes or level ground. It's useful for individuals who could benefit from reduced energy expenditure, with individuals with socket discomfort or pain, users who often change terrain and cadence, and anyone up to the weight limit of 125 kilograms. The Elan is aimed at K3 users, but it doesn't mean to say that somebody of a lower activity or higher activity level wouldn't benefit for everyday walking. Bench alignments can be found within the IFUs of our data sheets. It's important to understand when aligning an Elan or an ElanIC, you must ensure that you have the shoe on at all times, you have the Blatchford alignment wedge. By fully plantar-flexing the foot and using the wedge, we ensure that we have a neutral position. If you use your laser line and go straight through at the build line or the target line on the ankle, 5 to 10 millimeters behind that. More proximally, you want to look at your socket and ensure that you've bisected the socket and the laser line sits immediately through the center of that. It's always important to consider flat shifting the foot forwards and backwards when you are statically or dynamically aligning these ankles. Further training can be provided upon request. Programming the ElanIC couldn't have been made more simple with the use of the programming app. You can get this either via a tablet or your mobile device. It is Android only at this time. As you can see on the image on the right, you're starting at the top. You want to ensure that you have the ground reaction force vector, which is vertical, and you don't see any tilt or shift. If you do have tilt and your line isn't vertical, then you need to have a look at the shift of the ankle in comparison to the socket. Then you want to have a look at adjusting the plantar flexion and dorsiflexion resistances. It's important to note here that the app is incredibly intuitive, so you shouldn't need to change those resistances by any more than 1 or 2 figures as seen on the app. You want to ensure that you have a smooth rollover at heel strike through to toe off. Then you would, on the next page, you would select either transfemoral or transtibial. So the foot knows how much resistance is required. And then you would calibrate the foot. And the ankle is looking for approximately 6 to 10 consecutive steps on a level surface. At this point, you can then select the modes that you are required. So fast walk mode, ramp ascent and descent, and the standing support mode. There's a battery indicator on the ankle as well, which can be found by dorsiflexing the foot and lifting the ankle up to 45 degrees. And the indicator will flash depending on how much battery. 3 flashes equals full charge. In summary, a microprocessor adjusts the resistance to speed and terrain and improves on symmetry and balance. It detects when you're standing still and on ramps and increases the resistance to support your needs. Again, superb for bilateral users because of this. It's the most compact and lightweight microprocessor ankle on the market. And with the induction charging, it couldn't have been made more simple in order to charge the ankle, particularly if you've got reduced dexterity. With the IP rating of 67, the user has more flexibility in their day-to-day life. There's a wealth of published evidence to show the biomechanical improvements with using hydraulic ankles specifically, when compared with rigid or fixed ankles. And all of these studies relate to the hydraulic ankles with the standard range of 9 to 12 degrees of hydraulic movement. Further research is required to understand the benefits of the extended range echelons. Here's a sampling of the hydraulic ankle white paper. It has a great mix of scientific evidence and uses plain language, which means it's easy to read, particularly like the pictures. Means you can get through the paper a lot easier. It's a great resource and it's nice referrals for your clinical-based practice. We also have copies of the clinical compendium, which has all of those 23 peer-reviewed journals in the publications, and that's also available on our website. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Please feel free to turn your microphone on if you have any questions at all. Did have one question sent through previously by Selva Kumar, who asked if there's any issues with the Elan if it hasn't been charged for long periods of time. So if the Elan doesn't have any charge, it will essentially be exactly the same as a standard hydraulic ankle. It won't be able to increase or decrease resistances, but it still has all of those same benefits in the clinical studies. You may find that the ankle has gone into deep sleep mode if it hasn't been near a charger for a long time. In order to come out of deep sleep mode, just ensure the ankle is on charge for 5.5 hours and it will return back to its usual state. If there are no more questions, I will leave you to get back to your day. Thank you very much for attending. Hold up, I've got a question. Is there a specific socket technology to be considered when prescribing Elan? That's a tough one because it depends entirely on your patient. If with the Elan, we would say that any type of socket technology is advised. I think in the modern day, we will probably be advising to have some form of elevated vacuum if your patient can tolerate it. I hope that answers your question. If that's everything. Okay, thank you very much for attending today. This recording will be kept and added onto our website if you need to come back to it at any time. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.